This is MaryBeth Smith for the Feldenkrais Guild of North America, and I'm excited today to get a chance to talk to Dr. Martha Eddy. Dr. Martha Eddy is well known in the fields of somatic movement education and somatic dance education, with numerous academic appointments to her credit throughout her career, including the title of Body-Mind Cultural Expert at the State University of New York's Empire State College Graduate Center. She's also the founder of Dynamic Embodiment, which is a blend of Leban Bartenieff studies and body-mind centering. She's also known throughout the somatic education world as the author of Mindful Movement, The Evolution, I have it on a screen and on the book, The Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you for that nice introduction.
So Martha, I wanted to talk to you today because you've been working in the space of somatic movement education and social justice for quite a long time. And these social justice issues right now of race, of disparities in our society, and how it comes to roost for us who are somatic movement educators is very much at top of mind. So my question for you, I do just want to read for our audience a little bit of one paragraph, and that's going to get to the meat of what I really would like to hear from you about today. You say, social somatics implies taking context, culture, and relationships into account whenever practicing and applying somatic education. It can also include striving for somatic models to become embedded in all aspects of life and actively counter inequalities, making somatic education available to all people who would like to pursue this type of inquiry. Thus, a key point is that social somatics is a form of activism. So at the risk of two white ladies talking about marginalized communities in the somatic world, you've been embedded in this for years. I'd love to know your thoughts about action. What action can we as somatic communities begin to take to bring this vision of yours into reality?
Well, there really are a lot of things we can do. What came up as you read that was actually harboring back to chapter 5. And I personally probably didn't even make the link in this book, but very forefront for me at this moment is to recognize the global roots of the somatic field and how almost each of the early pioneers had some kind of influence from either Asia or perhaps from Africa. That shows up more in the second generation. So what, kind of regardless of that historical lineage, for us as somatic educators to recognize that the notion of the body-mind connection is really not a Western construct, that it's from the global South and from the East, and that it's alive today in those places. And so the more we can lift up in the dance field, that would be all the African types of dance. There's not just one African dance, there are hundreds, as well as, again, Asian dance forms. So just really looking, and even South American, and just from every culture, from New Zealand, from the Maoris, just really seeing that within these either dance forms or, in our case, healing practices, that there's already a strong philosophy. Whether or not we co-opted them is a whole other question, and some scholars could dig into that. I do kind of work on looking at the lineages to show, for instance, that Emily Conrad had studied in Haiti and learned Afro-Haitian work and dance, such that she found out how the smoothness of working from the water body could help move through spasticity of the muscular system. And she writes about it too, which is great, but just to really bring that forefront.
I think it's pretty amazing also that we tend to view our somatic practices as being very Western and very European, and we don't look back to those roots and influences. And so, as I think about allyship and our tendency as white people to sort of center ourselves in the story as we go along, it's very important to hold up these roots.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's one level. And again, I'm just going to talk very superficially in our short time.
What does social activism look like for a somatic practitioner?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so on that particular level, it's looking to colleagues in your area or going beyond your local community to find colleagues and bring them in as experts. And within that, there's a kind of working on anti-racism, and in particular trying to eradicate anti-Blackness by really lifting up the high level of intellectualism that exists in the Black community. So bringing in the Black scholars, whether again they're from dance departments, psychology departments, cultural studies departments, that have begun to really work with translating to the somatic field, possibly, or just are coming from their own very integrated, holistic point of view. And the more we can have them, these experts, as part of our dialogue, the more we're going to learn. And we're also going to be lifting up both the economy and the power of this level of knowledge. So that's one level.
So what I hear you saying, possibly as a direct application, for example, is that as somatic movement educators are planning their conferences, that they would choose a broad spectrum of scholars and possibly really elevating the Black scholars in this field, particularly from dance.
And psychology, because there really are quite a few in the psychology world. In particular, this author is getting some wonderful exposure right now.
Yes.
Resmaa Menakem wrote My Grandmother's Hands, and he is working with Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, at this point. So and he has created a form called cultural somatics, which I feel is very akin to social somatics, the idea of bringing equity into somatics, but also using somatics for equity.
Martha, let's talk about training programs in somatic education.
Yeah.
Because I know, just looking around the Feldenkrais community, I can't speak about other communities, we are obviously very white. I'd say the Black and brown faces are probably anywhere from 1% to 5% of our community. And there have been voices now and again about, there are barriers to pursuing a certification and a professional path in somatic education because of barriers of race and class and economics. From your research, what is successful in opening this up?
Well, it goes back to the last point, which is the more that we have leaders from the Black community or other people of color leading and teaching and actually questioning many of the premises of our work may not even be of appeal to people of color. And we have to just get with that. So there's a certain part that might be economic because of the intersectionality of poverty of the Black community in particular in our country, right, being a direct line from slavery. So yes, economic access is great, whether that means scholarships or just making it a priority to reach out into these various communities. And that means doing some searching and saying, I'm going to go be a white person alone, talking with a group of Blacks and just seeing if we're actually talking the same language at all. Can I get out of my comfort zone of power where I'm going to hire you as a guest versus I'm going to sit with you and find out whether we actually speak the same language and have some of the same principles and might want to work together and collaborate.
Lastly, Martha, I'd love to ask you what you think about how activism might show up for a somatic practitioner who has never considered these issues before as coming to be right in front of them, right in their face, right in their body, and how they interact with the client day to day, the class day to day.
Yeah. For some reason, when I first thought about us talking, and maybe it's because we're coming up to July 4th, I was feeling like everybody should read Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery. I mean, it is a great book, and it is a level of erudition that you don't see in white literature that often. And then Frederick Douglass's speech for for Independence Day, and why he does not, align with it. And that certainly links to June 19th and the idea that it took 2 more years for Texas to really liberate its slaves. So the more we can get behind that history and read, the better. And then what's really potent to me, and now I'm thinking of Claudine Rankin, a modern day artist and scholar and writer, is that basically there is so much of the body in these writings. Because when you've been oppressed with just lack of food on the one hand, but beating of your body on another, there is plenty to look at in terms of the somatic experience. So I think we need to just get inside that work in terms of activism. So that's just reading. But then, for instance, there are readings of Frederick Douglass's speech, the Renaissance House, which is the house that celebrates the work of Dorothy West, who was one of the first African-American novelists to get large exposure, is doing a live Zoom reading. So just get inside these groups and spend time with them physically. Even if it's through Zoom, there's a kind of embodiment component. So that's on the one level. The other is, again, what sliding fee scale do you want to have? What are you doing to bridge to different groups to make inroads so that people would trust you enough to want to accept your sliding fee scale? Those kinds of things.
So what I hear you saying is that for us and for people who might be new to this conversation and not knowing what to do that is effective, and not knowing what to do in terms of just beginner steps, is to dive in and self-educate and listen.
Yeah, and listening is important, but we often don't even have access to listening. So we kind of have to do a little search to find out which of your other friends are spending time in company, whether it's going to certain movies, reading book groups, or cultural events, really going and putting our money behind Black businesses and Black culture.
Actively seek out ways to support, and then when you are in that community, that you're there as a listener and not as a teller, because we have a lot to learn.
Use your money.
Right, and use your money. Martha, Eddy, thank you so much for contributing to this conversation and launching a new level of inquiry for all of us. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you to the whole Guild and to you in particular for wanting to have this conversation. It's really important.